Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for a breakfast with Blaha. And I wish we didn't have to make topics like this, but clearly we do. I saw in the comments the other day, a guy tried to say, well, people don't need to really worry about fat. It's carbohydrates that get stored as body fat. And it's like, all right, this is 2021. The fact that a single person at all who's lifting or into fitness or nutrition or anything else actually believes this is ludicrous, because this idea has been so heavily and repeatedly debunked that we shouldn't even have to discuss this anymore. All right, let's make this very, very clear. The storage or the creation of new fat in the body from carbohydrates is called de novo lipogenesis. And a few decades ago, some rodent studies found that when rodents were overfed carbohydrate, like mice and rats, they converted it to body fat. So all these people out here started thinking that this is what causes body fat gain. What turned out when we started studying in humans about a lot more about 10 to 15 years ago, we found out that under normal conditions, humans do not store carbohydrate as body fat. We don't. We store it as muscle glycogen, liver glycogen, or we burn the excess off as heat. Now, people will say, but isn't a calorie surplus what causes fat gain? Yes, because we can reach a threshold where we start storing carbohydrate as fat. It just doesn't happen normally. Usually what happens, almost all the fat on your body comes from the dietary fat that you eat. Okay, it comes from the fat that you eat. And yes, even if you do a really low carb diet, if you eat a calorie surplus, like let's say you successfully eat a calorie surplus on a ketogenic diet, you will gain fat. You will gain fat in direct proportion to that surplus. You might still be losing water weight, but you're gaining body fat. And eventually that water weight's going to come back on at some point, and then you're just going to be fatter for it. People lose weight on ketogenic diets because they suppress your appetite. You get bored of the food too, right? Ketosis itself is mildly nauseating. Can cause you to eat less. The fact that you can only eat a few foods, you start enjoying your food a lot less, right? This is why people who do keto diets, who try to add all these keto snacks in, they're still fat after 3 years. They're still obese. They're fat because they're working in other high-fat foods that are more hyper-palatable because they're not enjoying their food as much. But the reality is that diet works by making you not enjoy your food, so you eat less. The whole idea. It's how it creates a calorie deficit. You get real sick of steak and eggs every day, 7 days a week for 6 months straight. It starts to get boring. You just eat less and less. You start pushing some of it to the side more and more. Helps you lose weight. But the truth is, humans don't store carbohydrate as fat. We store the fat we eat. And if carbohydrates go up, we store more and more of the fat that we eat. We store the dietary fat. Now, we'll get into the situation where people will say, aha, so is this a hack? If we just drop our fat really low, will we gain less fat when we bulk? Maybe. But the whole point when we bulk is that we should be eating a lot of carbohydrate. Why? Better training response, better insulin response. Insulin is more anabolic to muscle tissue than it is to fat tissue, dramatically more so. So if you're trying to gain muscle, yes, high carbohydrate makes sense. However, here's the issue that we run into when we're eating very high carbs. If our fat drops low enough, we get some de novo lipogenesis. If your dietary fat drops under 10% for a little while of your total calories, your body will start storing a little carbohydrate. It still will not be that much, but it will start doing it in that situation. Now, in theory, though, you would still gain less fat doing that on really low fat and high carb, but you're also going to get less muscle growth because you're going to end up having more adaptive thermogenesis. In other words, your body is going to ramp up thermic effect of the carbohydrate, and it's going to take your NEAT up so that you end up oftentimes getting less and less of a calorie surplus. So you're gaining less muscle from the surplus. I'm not saying it doesn't work. It's actually extremely anabolic to do this. It works very well. Here's the problem with the hard gainer. The hard gainer has too much trouble eating food already. What happens if they're trying to eat mostly carbohydrate, with enough protein, not enough fat, that's already harder to overeat. Again, kind of the point that works really well for weight loss. It gets harder for them to overeat. What happens when they start to adapt and their NEAT starts going up? Before long, they're having to raise their bulking calories another 500, 700, 800. If they can't eat enough, if they're struggling to eat, the hard gainer will stop gaining muscle on this very quickly because they simply cannot get the food in. Because as we eat more and more carbs, our TDE goes up. It's not your metabolism that's going up. It's the thermic effect of it. Your NEAT goes up. You twitch more. You move more. So again, what ends up happening is that it becomes harder and harder to hit your surplus this way. Plenty of people can do it. A lot of people can do it. Not everyone can. So this is where it becomes a problem. It's a good way to minimize fat gain when bulking, but we come back to that point of the biggest part of it is because you're eating less of a surplus. Well, and that also is going to impact muscle growth. And a lot of people need the higher fat to get sufficient intake. And you know what? The thing of it is, the people who have to do that don't need to worry about it because dieting is easy for them. They don't like to overeat. And as soon as they start cutting the dietary fat back down, right, they replace all the steak with chicken, replace all the full-fat dairy with low-fat dairy, cut the peanut butter out. Before long, they're back to losing weight again because now they have a higher energy turnover. They have more muscle, everything else. They're going to lose weight easier. They don't need to worry about this as much. It's easier for them to trim it off. But the other circumstances where we'll see carbohydrate get stored as body fat is if we weigh carb overfeed, right? If we drop calories really or fat really low and we add a large calorie surplus from carbs, we do start seeing it. However, it takes time to kick in. There have been studies that looked at this and they found, like if they took women who were in a calorie deficit and they carb loaded them, they took them up to something like 1,000 calorie surplus. On the first day, the first 24 hours, they didn't store any carbohydrate as body fat. After a few days, it started going higher. So just an interesting thing to note that if a person really wanted to replenish muscle glycogen during a diet, they could have one day every week where they carb load like crazy if they keep the fat super low. Now people say, but wouldn't that violate calories in, calories out? No, because on the first day of carb loading, your thermic effect goes way up. So you actually end up burning any of the surplus carbohydrate that doesn't go to replenish glycogen and everything. What happens? It gets burned off as body heat. That's calories out. So all of this, what people need to remember is that no matter how you manipulate these variables, you don't ever really get around calories in, calories out. But under most conditions, the body fat that you are gaining is coming from your dietary fat. So again, I'm not telling people, just to always eat low fat and high carb, that's the ultimate solution. It's not, for reasons we kind of broke down through there. But we need to lose this idea that carbohydrates themselves are fattening. They're very not fattening compared to dietary fat. They really are. That really shouldn't be your concern. It really should just be total net calories. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.